In this podcast episode, Mike Graham shares his personal experience of a controversy that led to his departure from TalkSport, touching on issues of workplace politics, media culture, and social change. The discussion expands into broader topics such as the shifting landscape of British media, political fragmentation, immigration, societal identity, and the challenges facing the country today. Throughout the conversation, Graham offers insights from his extensive career in journalism and radio, as well as his current venture into independent YouTube content creation. Mike Graham begins by recounting the events surrounding a controversial and offensive post that appeared on his Facebook and linked Instagram accounts, content he insists he did not post. The post in question contained racist imagery and comments, leading to complaints from within TalkSport, the radio station where he was a longtime contractor. Despite his protests of innocence and efforts to prove that the post was not his doing, Graham faced intense scrutiny, including demands from the company to allow them to investigate his phone and iPad. Guided by cybersecurity experts and legal counsel, he refused to hand over his devices due to privacy concerns and fears the company would access personal conversations unrelated to the incident. This reluctance escalated tensions, and despite not being officially suspended or fired, his contract was not renewed. Graham emphasized feeling targeted by internal staff who opposed him and expressed that the entire ordeal was financially and emotionally draining. To maintain his reputation, he even commissioned an independent forensic investigation to demonstrate his innocence, though it did not satisfy his former employer. The conversation then shifts to the transformation of British media, particularly the decline of traditional newspapers such as The Sun and The Times, which once wielded significant political influence. Graham reflects on his early days as a Fleet Street journalist, describing a trade rooted in working-class values and rigorous training, a stark contrast to today's media environment, which he sees as London-centric, overeducated, and ideologically driven. He highlights the rise of wokeism infiltrating media organizations, including TalkSport, leading to a cultural shift that conflicts with previous norms. This change affects what topics can be discussed freely and influences hiring and content decisions. Graham laments the loss of straightforward, challenging journalism and the handshake between media power and genuine public inquiry, as well as the embrace of identity politics and corporate diversity agendas. Amid the changes in mainstream media, Graham expresses enthusiasm for the opportunities presented by platforms like YouTube, where content creators can build audiences without gatekeepers. He shares his positive experience launching his own show on YouTube after leaving TalkSport, describing growth in subscribers and viewership that eclipses the live show numbers of some established outlets. This new model allows creative and editorial freedom, but comes with challenges of self-management and competition. He acknowledges how talent can now reach audiences directly, bypassing traditional media's once solid control over public discourse. The dialogue touches on the fracturing political landscape in the UK, with the traditional two-party system losing ground to new parties like Reform UK and the Green Party. Graham critiques the Labour Party's current leadership and platform, suggesting the party is out of touch and likely to continue losing influence, particularly highlighted by upcoming electoral losses. He comments on the Green Party's shift away from environmental concerns toward more radical social policies, while also noting Reform UK as a potential viable alternative on the right, albeit one still developing its identity. The splintering, he argues, offers a more representative but unpredictable political future, where smaller parties could shape governance differently than historical norms. A significant portion of the discussion revolves around immigration's impact on British society, especially London. Graham describes his perception that London has changed dramatically in recent years, becoming culturally unrecognizable to many long-term residents. He contrasts this with his experience of immigration in 1980s New York, where new arrivals assimilated and embraced an American identity. In the UK, he contends, communities of immigrants often remain culturally distinct and resistant to integrating into a British identity. Graham explores how political and governmental policies have influenced demographic shifts, including contentious initiatives to diversify rural British areas, which some perceive as eroding traditional communities. He draws a separation between ethnicity and nationality, advocating for integration while recognizing the complexity of collective identity in a changing society. The conversation moves to economic realities confronting ordinary Britons, including inflation, rising living costs, and wage stagnation outside the public sector. Graham expresses concern about the growing gap between political elites and working-class people struggling to afford essentials like food and housing amid escalating rents and taxes. He criticizes welfare policies that he believes discourage work and encourages immigration-driven pressures on public resources. The ongoing debates over net zero environmental targets are framed as priorities of a detached upper-middle-class elite rather than the lived experiences of average families. He highlights how many people feel ignored by those in power and alienated from the political narrative. Graham discusses broader cultural shifts, including the ascendancy of identity politics, ideological conformity, and the erosion of traditional community bonds. He critiques mainstream institutions, from media to education to corporate environments, for their adoption of left-wing social agendas that alienate many citizens. The notion of wokeism is described as pervasive, impacting everyday language and behavior, including examples like prohibiting terms such as manpower in official contexts. He also addresses how these shifts affect perceptions of Britishness, community, and belonging, and the consequences of ignoring a robust debate on identity and integration. Touching on political accountability, Graham voices frustration with perceived hypocrisy among politicians, highlighting instances where MPs and officials exploit expenses systems or avoid proper salary structures. He argues for paying politicians higher salaries with harsher penalties for misconduct to attract capable individuals and restore public trust. Criticism extends to the failures of government departments and public institutions, with a demand for serious, pragmatic policies rather than empty rhetoric from party politicians often focused on narrative over results. Graham reflects on the decline of conservative leadership and policy failures spanning the last decade and a half, including mishandling of Brexit, immigration, and the COVID-19 pandemic. He challenges narratives by Tory defenders of past leaders such as Boris Johnson and calls for a realistic assessment of the party's role in Britain's current crises. He concedes that while the Conservative Party has damaged Britain, the opposition has so far failed to provide meaningful alternatives. He also outlines the pressures and threats faced by figures like Nigel Farage from increasingly polarized political environments. Towards the end, Graham briefly touches on international issues, including concerns about Iran's political future and U.S.-China relations, while noting the disconnect between public understanding and political narratives. He highlights the need for vigilance regarding surveillance technologies and civil liberties, drawing attention to debates around facial recognition and data privacy fueled by political and technological shifts. Finally, Graham updates listeners on his independent show's progress and ambitions to expand interactivity and content depth, aiming to replicate the dynamism of mainstream morning broadcasts. When asked what important subjects are being overlooked, he raises the unpredictable consequences of the situation in Iran as an area of growing global concern and potential impact on UK society.